Support for Flying Valiant Builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs on YouTube, where no diecast is safe. Video Geek Productions, all business, all geek. Brian Smith YouTube channel, clever schemes for fun and profit. A generous grant from the Jonathan VONESH Foundation, and from support from viewers like you. Please like, share, and subscribe. I will not do Mad Max. 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 Oh boy. Here we go. Hey there, folks. Chuck here. And boy, do we have an interesting one today. I was intrigued by the opportunity to do the 73 Ford Falcon XB for Three Blind Mice. And for those of you who don't know, the Three Blind Mice are Lee, George, and Paul. They are three YouTube creators who I will link to in the description below, who host an invitational build-off every month. And this month, they picked the 1973 Falcon XB, which, as many of you might know, is most popular, at least on the stateside, as the Mad Max V8 Interceptor from the old Mel Gibson movie, and now the Tom Hardy Charlize Theron movie. But that seemed a little obvious for me. Maybe I could go some different route. What other things could I do with a Falcon XB? And then I remembered this great little documentary called Love the Beast from Eric Bana, and it tells a very cool love story between a man and his car. He had a 1973 Ford Falcon XB that he got when he was 15, and he and his buddies got it running and competed in races together. And the driving plot of the documentary at first was to fix the car up for one last run at the Targa Tasmania race that he would do with his childhood friends. The story takes an odd twist as midway through the race, he loses control of the car and crashes into a tree. And the damage was pretty severe to the car, and that's not really a spoiler, that's covered in the trailer. So the rest of the documentary is him exploring his feelings about the car and, you know, whether it's worth carrying on with this car that's basically totaled after the wreck. And it really spoke to me because I have also had my car, the Flying Valiant, since I was 15. I've had it with me over half my life now, and I have had to have that hard conversation with myself several times after mistakes I've made with the car. I knew that before we had our daughter, I wanted to have my car done and fixed up the way I liked it and drive it from Florida to Pennsylvania to have it show at the Chryslers at Carlisle show. And my friend Ben and I worked hard on it. My wife Carolyn chipped in a lot. We spent hours and hours in the garage night after night working on this car, and we finished it the day before we were supposed to drive to Pennsylvania. We got the window tinting finished, and it was on the road the next day with less than 1,000 miles on the completely rebuilt engine. So we had all the spare parts that we could stuff into the trunk, and we just hoped for the best. And we made it up there, and we drove into the car show. We did not clean the car. We just drove it straight in and parked it. And of all things, on the second day, I happened to come across a gentleman named Jeff Stunkard, who is pretty well known in the drag racing community. He's written several books on NHRA races and stuff. And he was one of the celebrity judges for the show. And he really liked my car. And not only did he like my car, he gave it his Celebrity Choice Award and then wrote an article about it. And the car ended up in CarCraft, which was really cool. And I'll link to the article so you can check that out. Again, the documentary really kind of spoke to me as far as having a similar relationship that's often fraught with stress and anguish with an inanimate object. So anyway, I thought I'd pay tribute to Mr. Bana's car by recreating it in 1/64 scale. And because my specialty is weathered and damaged vehicles, I would recreate it as it appears immediately after the crash. All right, so let's break down how this build's going to go. First, recreate Eric Bana's rally car, the Beast. Replicate the damage with wine foil. Create replica graphics and print with my new white and color laser printer. More on that in a minute. Do a full custom interior to recreate the racing interior of the actual car. and simulate some light race weathering. All right, ready? Punch that subscribe button. Let's boogie. All right, breakdown went pretty much as expected. No real surprises there. Started off early with the pledge dip. I knew this car was going to be relatively clean for my builds, so I wanted to make sure the glass looked as shiny as possible. I started on the interior first. I got rid of the steering wheel nub, busted out my X-Acto chisel to start making cut lines on the interior, and then used the jeweler saw to chop out the front and back seats and center section of the console, because all of that would be flat in the actual car, because they stripped out everything but the door panels and the dashboard. Once it was all cut out, I used my sander barrel on my Dremel to smooth everything out, and I used my calipers to get a basic measurement of the interior and set about cutting the custom interior pieces out of 20/100 styrene, and then promptly snapped the back in half, which ended up working out okay. I was able to maneuver things a little better with it in two pieces, actually. I got this great little square as part of a lot of railroading supplies that I got off of a friend's father, and got a recording of that entire unboxing that I want to share with you. It's huge. It's going to be very long, but if you're interested in seeing that, let me know in the comments below. It was a wild haul of stuff, but a lot of great fabricating tools, and that little square has proven to be invaluable when it comes to making straight cuts on styrene. Once I got everything super glued in place, I used my round handle needle files to smooth off the glue bombs that I dropped to get everything to stick together. I really hate the plastic that comes with these interiors. It is really hard to glue to. I used 1/16 inch styrene rod to fabricate the roll cage. I used one of my 3D printed steering wheels to set off the interior a little better. I recently sent a load of steering wheels off to King Size Customs for him to test out, but see if he liked them, and I might make that available to folks to use in the future if that's something that y'all would be interested in if you like my steering wheels. I put a little piece of half round in the middle of the interior to simulate the drive shaft hump, and then it was off to priming and my first paint job using straight craft paints. I used a lipstick red enamel gloss. I don't know why it's called enamel, because it is an acrylic paint that's water thin, but okay. And it was thinned with Fantastic, and I wish I could remember the gentleman that told me how to thin craft paint with Fantastic Cleaner, but it does a, well, fantastic job. It thins it out really nicely. I used a little bit of flow improver, although I think that was a little unnecessary, because it just thins out so nice and it sprayed really well. Once everything was red, I went over the detail pieces with a grimy black, because again, I don't believe in true black or true white in my builds 95% of the time, and the grimy black has just enough of a charcoal to it to really look like the racing seats and the black on the dashboard. And I used it to overlay the grille that I would go back in later with some very special paint that I'm very excited to show off. Then some Testors Clear Red on the taillights, and a little dry brushing with that special paint that I will be telling you about shortly, but it's exciting. I think this is a Molotow pen killer. I got an AK Interactive panel liner kit, and I will talk more about that in a little bit. This is the panel liner for black camouflage. I thought it would look cool on the black seats and help give them some highlights, and it did ultimately, but this stuff does lay pretty thick for a panel liner, so if you're going to use that on a black camouflage or a black paint job to bring out the panel lines, just be careful with it. It does look really cool when it's done and you wipe it off, but it does not have the surface tension that the normal black washes do. It's more of a thin gray paint than an actual panel wash, so be careful with it. Then it was off to the chassis. I started with the front end damage, using the jeweler saw to put some gap between the bumper and the lower valance, and the lineman pliers to give it a bit of a tweak. I used the pliers earlier on to bend the grille, as you saw, and then to tweak the bumper. I thought I would be so clever this time and actually do the wheel fitment first, and I got lucky. The Greenlight wheels that I used fit perfectly. They're not a perfect match for the car, but they are pretty close, and they just needed a silver paint job. But yeah, I thought I was so clever getting ahead of the game and setting the wheels, because I always forget to do that earlier on. But new stuff came up, and we'll get to that in a minute. Again, lipstick red base paint on the chassis, followed by a clear coat, I was worried this paint would turn out too pink, but the thicker I put it on, the darker red it got, and it turned out to be a pretty close match, at least according to my TV, to the actual red that was used on the car. It's kind of tricky because I think the car was actually a slightly darker red, but because this is a smaller scale, the red looks darker. I noticed on several of the undershots of the car that part of the underside was red and part of it was black. So again, I used the grimy black to fill in parts of the chassis. But the front end was mostly red and silver parts. I used the black panel line wash on the chassis to add some details, and that worked really well. I'll get more to that in a minute. And I used some MSP True Silver and some Vallejo Oily Steel to do the silver accents on the underside. The exhaust pipes were like a stainless steel on the car, and it had black exhaust tips, so I had to make sure to hit the grimy black on there to give it a good flat, almost burned exhaust finish. And it was time to do the wheels. That was as simple as prime, paint, and wash. And then it was time for the body. Lots of sawing. I'm getting lots of practice in with my jeweler saw. I'm really enjoying the spiral blades. Thank you, Christian at 1st and 64th Customs, for the suggestion of using spiral cuts. That has been a lifesaver. Christian is one of my main Bandit level patrons, and he is amazing. You really should check out his channel if you haven't already. He has far too few subscribers, and he is very, very talented and a really nice guy. I didn't really need to remove the hood to do what I needed to do on this car, but I wanted to just because it's good practice and I need more help cutting in a straight line. I've learned that lubricating with beeswax really helps with cutting straight. That's your little tip of the day. Make sure if you're going to use a jeweler's saw to use some kind of lubricant. Beeswax is one of them. There's actually a special jeweler's saw lubricant that you can get. The biggest pain of the entire build was actually the rear spoiler, because it is really like a solid piece of metal that's part of the casting. It's not hollow in any stretch of the word. So to get that thing off was a lot of sawing, and then there was a lot of damage underneath it. So even after using the barrel sander to sand it all down, it was still pretty tore up. Also, I noticed midway through my barrel sanding as I was looking at my reference pictures that his car did not have the side scoops that are on this casting, so I had to barrel sand those off. There was also some damage to the rear quarter that happened in the crash, so I just used my burr tool to cause that. And once I had all that done, it was just a matter of wire wheeling everything to a smoother finish and using the round handle needle files to clean up the rest of the casting lines, and then cut new lines in the trunk because the cast spoiler fills in where the trunk lines were. I used a little filler putty. I'm not a super fan of this putty. It's definitely a putty that's designed for plastic. It's got that, model cement smell to it, and it will definitely melt plastic if you put it on there. It does not stick as well to metal as I would like. It does the job okay. You just have to be careful. Once the filler was applied, I did some more sanding all over the body just to make sure things were smooth, and sanded the trunk. This is a fun trick that I've used for a while now. You saw it on my Demolition Derby build, and Sharon Tarshish recently did a video about using a thick foil to do similar dents, and I'll link to his video. It was a great one. He did a fantastic job of simulating dents on his, but I'm doing like a whole panel here. So I wanted to take the fender that I cut off, wrap the foil around it tightly, cut as close to the lip as I could, and then very gently slide out the fender to leave the shell that will fit in place of the old fender and will dent very nicely like real metal would at that scale. The hood was also bent on the original car, and as much as I wanted to try to bend it with the lineman pliers, it was not as simple as that. It's very thick and sturdy die-cast metal at that point, so I had to thin it with the barrel sander from below, and then it tweaked pretty easily. I glued everything back in place with my thick CA glue. Once I got the fender secured, then I could start going in and shaping the dents. But first I had to get it so it fit as flush as possible with the actual metal of the car. Use the accelerant to make sure everything held in place quickly, and then use my fingers to create the dents and the pulled away metal part. It's pretty straightforward. You just kind of follow the folds from the reference photo and try and get it as close as I could, and use my fingernails to create the creases. And it really does create a startling effect. And then when it's done, I go over the back with the CA glue and the accelerant to kind of fill it in and give it some rigidity. And it's, definitely not something that I would put on a piece that's going to get played with, but for something sitting on the shelf, it does a really good job of adding some rigidity to it. I wanted to add some mirrors to the side, and the original car had some California Sport mirrors on it, so I wanted to recreate those. So I got on Thingiverse, found that somebody had a pretty detailed model of the California Sport mirror. So I downloaded it and did some assembly in Tinkercad and put the whole thing together and then shrunk it down and printed it out and realized that it was just too thin, that the actual structure of the model when shrunk down to 1/64 was too thin to hold up under printing. So I quickly designed my own mirror in Tinkercad, which I did not record because at that point I was just too tired. But the end result turned out well and it's nice and solid, and I printed off a few dozen to use on my next couple builds, so that's going to be handy. And when adding these mirrors, definitely add it before the paint. The CA glue sticks much better to bare metal than to a painted surface. Then once the car was in lipstick red and a clear coat, it was time to do the graphics. So fortunately, I had taken about 50 screenshots of the car, so I had it at just about every angle, bring it all into Photoshop, use the calipers to size things, and I got it more or less correct. Now, Paul over at Fat Guy Productions did a really cool video on printing using white, and I'm not going to go into it here because he covers it way better than I ever could. But basically, the way it shakes out, you can buy these printers now that you put white toner in place of the black toner, print your original design in all black with a trap layer, a slightly smaller version of your actual graphic. Replace the white cartridge with the black cartridge, pull up your color image, put the piece of paper back in the printer, and it prints out on top of the white layer. Obviously, there are some alignment or registration issues. Paul goes over that in detail, and he is not wrong. It is a tricky thing. This is actually the second go-around that I had printing it, and it came out close. The biggest hang-up for me was that some of the decals needed to have a white border, and having that white border made it tricky to do the trapping layer, which is supposed to be smaller than the actual graphic. But again, Paul covers that way better than I can, so I will link to his video. As you can see, I printed out several different versions. I printed one version with the white and color on top of each other. That's the version that you see here. I printed a version that was just the white, and I printed a version that was just the color without the white. If worst came to worst, I could put on the white layer of the decal and then put the color decal on top of it. The trick, of course, with that is the danger of reactivating the decal that you've already put on the car, but that's, again, a little inside baseball for this video. If you have any questions about my printing these decals, you can certainly ask in the comments below or ask Paul in his video. He, again, covers this in a fantastic way. It is one of my bookmarked videos that I go back to again and again. I like to trim all my decals out first, and even though sometimes things don't go right and I have to go back and get one of my backup copies, it's just good to have them all printed out and kind of get into this Zen-like flow of putting the decals on. And I try to work one side of the car at a time. I don't just randomly put them on. I use Microsol on the windshield graphic and the Meyer graphic on the damaged fender to get it to wrap really well to the piece that it's on. The windshield decal was a little tricky because I made it a flat graphic, and it wasn't really a flat windshield. It's got kind of a curve up to it, but the Microsol softens the decal enough that you can bend up the ends, and it allows you to add some flex to the decal without wrinkling. Once all the decals were on, it was time for a clear coat, and this is the stuff that I've been waiting to tell you all about. This is Mirror from Stuart Semple. It is pretty much the most magical paint that I have ever worked with. I think this could be a Molotow Chrome Pen killer if it weren't for the price. It is $37 US and change for this little bottle, but this stuff is incredible. It lays so flat, and it takes so little of it to do. It lays 1 micron thick, and it does an amazing job of replicating a mirror or chrome-like finish, and the control on it is so good. It flows so well. I am super thrilled with it, and I might actually do a whole shootout video where I do a Molotow pen versus this mirror paint, but it does an incredible job, and I'm really enjoying it. I will definitely be using it on future builds. Any questions about that, let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. Once the mirror was dry, it was time for the panel liner. As I mentioned earlier, I got this set from AK Interactive, and it is really handy for using different colors. I use the blue and gray camo liner here, and it flows really well. It's an enamel-based wash, which I actually prefer on an acrylic paint job because I know that it's not going to react with the paint underneath it. And it makes cleanup very easy because you can use a cotton swab that's got a little bit of thinner on it, and it cleans up your overruns very nicely. It's not a flawless way to do panel lining, but it is very smooth and easy to work with. I found that even after it dries, it is very easy to clean up. Even with a dry cotton swab and a little pressure, it comes off very easily on a smooth surface. So I've definitely come around to solvent-based washes when it comes to doing pin washes and panel lining. And once that was done, I thought it would be as simple as snapping things back together. I was very wrong. Because, well, I had tested everything out and everything did fit as far as the roll cage going in on the body. I had test fitted the roll cage to the body without the glass in the car. And once the glass was in the car, the roll cage was too tall. And I was not about to go in and make the roll cage any shorter because I felt like it was already short enough. So that meant cutting out the glass. There was a lot of cutting and testing and cutting and testing to get everything to fit. And finally, I just cut the center section out completely and used some pressure-sensitive adhesive glue to hold the glass in place, and used a little bit of plastic packaging that I had lying around to do the side panel glass, and it was a mess. It basically added another 2 hours to the build that I was hopefully going to be using for making this video and moving on to my next car, but that's the way the cookie crumbles on these special custom jobs. So a few hours later, once everything was finally back and fitting together, and it was time to bust out another group of paints that I've been really excited to try, the AK Interactive Asphalt Weathering set. This set is basically 2 pigments and a texture paint. They are City Dirt, Asphalt Road Dirt, and Splatter Effects Dirt. And I used the Asphalt Road Dirt and the Splatter Effects Dirt because the Targa Tasmania black top that they were using is more of a darker brownish color. So I went over the car with the pigments first, sticking almost entirely around the chassis of the car and the lower quarter panels of the car because, well, it did pick up some dirt, I'm sure. It still looks relatively clean. And then once I had the pigment on, I went over the car with the Splatter Effects Dirt, stippling it on, dry brushing it on in spots, but again, keeping it pretty light. The pigments did a good job of getting down into the tire tracks, and once I went over everything with Pigment Fixer, it did a good job of sealing everything up. I used the mirror paint to get the trim on the side windows. I decided to do that after I glued the windows in because I didn't want to have the paint get scratched or rub off onto the car while I was putting the windows in, and it worked out okay. It's a pretty forgiving paint to work with. I think it's more forgiving than the Molotow. I did Oyster White for the headlights and some wet effects to add the glass-like effect over the headlights and driving lights, then the final pigment binder to seal everything in place. And with that, it was time to do the final decal and give this car its designation as Car 0017. And get it ready for its final display. Before we do that, let's take a look back at where we started this yellow 1973 Falcon XB from Hot Wheels, which in and of itself was a very nice looking version of the car. I really liked the relatively stock paint job that they put on it, and the graphics were pretty nice. Here's what we ended up with. The race-worn and crashed Beast from Eric Bana's Love the Beast documentary, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. There are some parts that I definitely think I could have done better, and there are definitely some parts that turned out way better than I thought they would. Let me know what you think. If you've seen the documentary, let me know in the comments what your favorite part of it is, or if you've had a car that you've had a really long time or had a very special bond with, I'd love to hear about that too. Like most of the cars I build, this one is for sale, and if you're interested in it, you can hit me up in the comments or email me. My address is in the About section of my channel. And again, this video is brought to you by my amazing patrons. You saw the Bandit level presenting sponsors of the show at the beginning, and I'd also like to shout out Mid-Island Customs Diecast at the Rockford level. He has a great YouTube channel. Check it out. Thanks, Evan. My amazing wife, Carolyn, who also supports the show. She has a tutoring program where she teaches math over Zoom. She is certified for 6th through 12th grade US and has done a great job teaching all sorts of geometry and algebra to all sorts of people. I'd also like to thank my Douglas level sponsors, the Drew Rants and Raves podcast, Jordan Kleinen, and Curtis Crafts on YouTube. Everyone's links are in the description below. As you may have heard, I have a merch store as well that's run by my brother Justin, who does all the graphic design for this show. And if you want to support the channel and look cool while doing it, be sure to check the link below. I just got 2 Flying Valiant brand masks in the mail, and I'm very excited about those, and this amazing new design that my brother did on a t-shirt. Thank you, Justin. So check the description for the link to my special merchandise store on TeePublic, and all that money goes to supporting Justin and thanking him for doing the work that he does on this channel. We'll have the glamour shots for the car at the end of the video, but if you want some more images of my builds, you can find them over at Instagram at Flying Valiant, or you can find Flying Valiant on Facebook. If you like what I do and want to support it, my patrons are what help me get all these amazing paints and supplies and give me the opportunity to test some stuff out and share my experiences with you. And if you'd like to help support the project, you can go to flyingvaliant.com or patreon.com/flyingvaliant to learn how you can support the show and get some extra freebies along the way. So that's it for now. I've got another video to work on. So thank you for watching this video. Please like, leave a comment, subscribe, share with your friends, all that good stuff. And as always, I'd like to thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.